up as we go, just as we've got a lot to cover today and a busy panel, so don't want to wait too long. First off, a big welcome from me. My name is James McIntosh. I'm calling from the Reuters HQ in London today, and will be taking the reins of moderation for this session, which, as you can see, is a new era of outsourcing, how to improve efficiency and streamline trial solutions with a personalized approach to clinical. Today, and with the help of the panelists, if we could just go to the next screen slide, you'll be able to see. We're going to be talking about the world of clinical trial outsourcing. For a long time, and we've discussed this in a lot of our events, it seems there's a common understanding of a broken system or a system which is not adequate, and being both inefficient and costly. Over the last year, we've seen great strides in many areas, especially if you look to the world of virtual and decentralized trials, with industry, as we're all aware, pushed into these areas, which has seen a lot of innovation. But today we're going to be taking a slightly different lens to, as I say, explore the world from the perspective of outsourcing. We're going to be discussing what the key issues are currently, in particular, looking at the positives and negatives associated with working with smaller CROs as well, debunking some of the myths and risk factors, and looking at how we can actually reach a more personalized future that better fulfills the need of patients, providing a better experience, and operates more efficiently, improving timelines across the board. A couple of notes before I shut up and let the panelists introduce themselves. We will be incorporating your questions, so hover over the screen now. You'll be able to see the Q&A function, either at the bottom or somewhere on the Zoom's panel. Please ask your questions whenever you think of them. We'll incorporate them into the discussion and save some time at the end, so please ask away. We'll also be doing some live polling. We'll obviously say when this is happening, but just keep an eye out, as would be great to get as many respondents as possible. Now, as I say, enough from me. I think it's time to let this esteemed panel introduce themselves. So if you guys could turn your videos back on, make sure you're not muted, and we'll start with you, Anne-Marie, just as your top left. Could we just have a bit about your experience and why you're here today?
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Inglis. I'm a senior director in clinical operations, currently at Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals. I've been in the industry for 20+ years. I was mostly with GSK for 23 years prior to moving over to Mallinckrodt. When I was at GSK, I was part of the operations organization there, where we were primarily responsible for doing our own trials. Now that I've moved to Mallinckrodt, just about everything is outsourced. So in order to be at all effective, we're working with CRO partners. And I am here today because of some of the things that I've seen in my experience that I think could be done significantly different than they are now.
Awesome. And we'll work our way around. So Hans, Philip, Tsvetelina, and Keith.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hans van Dijk, celebrating later this year my 30th anniversary, I guess, in clinical research. Always on the service side, spent 10 years, I would say, with smaller CROs and 20 years with the biggest CRO in the world in various senior management positions. So really seen the strong points and perhaps less strong points from both sides of the spectrum. And, I really believe there's no one size fits all, but that each of the different size organizations serve a different role to different customers. And I think that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, Philip Scheltens. I'm a professor of neurology, 30 years at the Amsterdam University Medical Center, also director of the Alzheimer Center. And from the start of my career, I've been involved in clinical trials as an investigator, later as a PI, nationally, but also internationally. I've worked with almost, I think, all the CROs. I have formed an opinion on how CROs work as a customer in the sites as a site, and also have some experience in the sense of choosing CROs. And so I've come to know a little bit better which CRO, which type of CRO, which works in which situation. And I'm very much in favor of a personalized approach, in the sense that I think every sort of trial deserves a typical sort of CRO, and happy to discuss that further.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tsvetelina Ivanova, and I'm already 11 years in the clinical research. I'm Chief Compliance Officer at CRO Comac Medical, and I have been involved so far in the different quality discussions across the industry, working together with the bigger CRO, the big pharma organization, with the biotech companies. And I'm here to discuss a different way of organizations, how smaller organization can bring quality and efficiency in the clinical research, and the importance of these two aspects within the outsourcing model. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Keith Coffey, Senior Vice President for Medical and Scientific Affairs at Peachtree Bioresearch Solutions, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a pulmonary critical care physician, have been in clinical development both on the sponsor and the CRO side for the past 20 plus years. I have worked for the two large global CROs that in the past several months have become much bigger. So yeah, looking forward to discussing options and alternatives in CRO outsourcing today.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And so let's get straight into it. And I think what would be good for everyone and for the audience involved, let's set the scene and start off by just talking about some of the issues that you guys see from your varying perspectives with the current status quo of outsourcing in clinical trials. What do we see as kind of the biggest issues here? I'm going to run a poll as well, so we can compare to the audience. So I'm just going to launch that now, audience. If you're listening, please answer that as well. And while they're doing that, Anne-Marie, why don't you start off with an industry perspective?
Okay, sure. So when you posed this question as part of the things to think about, right now in my world, the biggest thing that I'm dealing with is some of the contracting issues, trying to understand what the budget is going to be, what the actual tasks are going to be, and how we're going to put together a statement of work that adequately reflects what really needs to be done without having to redo it a million times because the assumptions you made in the beginning are incorrect. And closely tied to that is understanding the true cost of the outsourcing when you are contracting for individual bits of work as opposed to a delivered product. I think that whole issue for me is tied into the bigger issue with the CRO, in my opinion, which is that there is, at least at some of the big ones, a lack of flexibility. You're only operating in a what do I need task-wise at this particular moment, and everybody knows that research does not work like a cookie cutter. So being set up to act like a cookie cutter when things can change on a dime becomes very sort of ineffective, inefficient, and frustrating from the sponsor's perspective, as well as the CRO's perspective, I would imagine. The other piece of that too is when you have to pivot. I know most sponsor companies are going to have SOPs that say you can't do work that hasn't been contracted for until the contract's in place. And so depending on how your arrangement is set up, you could have narrowly boxed yourself into a corner where in order to pivot, you practically have to make changes on the fly, but your original contract might not allow for that, which just comes back to bite you on the other end. So say kind of the very rigid cost structures that we have generally encountered don't allow for the inherent risks in clinical research and make it very difficult to pivot. And then with decentralized trials and hybrid, it really makes the whole system difficult.
Absolutely, and so we don't have to imagine what the CROs think. So Hans, Tsvetelina, Keith, do you guys want to jump in, and then Philip, I'll get your point at the end.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, the way I look at it, and I think you touched on it, Anne-Marie, is that, you know, in particular with the large CROs, in order to maintain control, they are very metrics driven. And I think you're all familiar with this picture of a timber factory being somewhere downstream and the wood being cut somewhere up on the mountain and the wood being transported by the river. And I think that's a bit how the large CROs work. They throw all the wood in the river, and at some point over time, all of the wood will arrive at the factory. But you know, if you need 4 specific pieces of wood that's going to be the foundation of your house, you want to ensure that those 4 arrive first and that somebody is really looking after it across the whole stream, and if necessary, carry it across some of the obstacles that are there. I think that's really what you need to be looking for in a CRO. If you're a smaller organization that just have, you know, 1 compound or 2, 3 trials that are really key to the success of your company.
So I pretty much align with what Anne-Marie already touched the base, the efficiency. Sometimes I like the quote, less is more. Sometimes it's to have a smaller thing, it can be brings something more in terms of efficiency, of also the quality. So this is my important stuff. Some of the procedures, the way of controlling the quality of work within the bigger organization are almost heavier than the smaller ones because of the associated risk. But this is usually triggers decreased efficiency. And one of the things that should be considered when you outsourcing a project, and if you're going into whether you have the knowledge within the organization that would like to partner with and can bring the enough level of understanding of your project and its specifics, because every project is more or less unique. And of course, the different structure between the organization communicate with each other, and how this is at the end of the day brings the targets that you would like to have. And it's not a very let's say dispersed structure, and which the different teams are not communicating to each other, and this actually triggers additional efforts to oversight the different teams within another organization.
Yeah, I would follow on that, you know, part of what we strive to do is really get a good idea of the scope, Anne-Marie, of the study from the very beginning. But that sometimes evolves on the sponsor side. And I think one of the areas that we can really excel in is being very nimble. Quick turnaround of changes in the project, changes in the proposal, changes in the scope of work. We can do that very quickly. As Tsvetelina said, with good communication.
And Philip, any? We've had some good quotes there, some good analogies. Anything to add to the cacophony of voices? Oh, you're just on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, just to from 2 sides. So from the trial side, my experience is that many of the large CROs have actually become too big. So what is really very annoying that you have to work with during a trial, in my experience, in my area of expertise in the Alzheimer field, trials usually take 1 year or 2 years, sometimes even longer. And you have to work with several teams because they all leave and they have new people all the time, even CRAs actually, and it's really very annoying. And so as a site, I mean, that's really sort of a thing that we are struggling with. So on the other side, as a PI, I'm often involved in designing the trial. And then what I sometimes see is that sponsors already have asked a CRO just to design the trial without even asking the proper questions. So what does the drug actually do? What is the mode of action? What we target? And then the CRO just really sort of have to just come up with some ideas which I think is also not good. So on the company side, I see a lot of the companies outsource completely everything and having no control of the whole process anymore. I think that's actually not good at all, because as a company, it's your drug, it's your future, and you should at least keep control of what's happening. So there must be something in between that we could work on. And my experience with smaller CROs have been much more sort of fruitful and successful in that sense, that you keep a very, very short distance and very sort of regular meetings with the same people at the CRO, both on the trial side, but also on the PI side. And I like very much to have this short lines of communication. And for me, from my perspective, that usually only works with the smaller CROs.
So I'm just going to share the results as well. So it aligns quite nicely with what we were just talking about. Just so everyone knows, so we've got what is the biggest current challenge in clinical outsourcing, and up top we've got defining the true scope of work and budgeting. So Anne-Marie, I'm thinking of what you were talking about there. And then it's pretty tight amongst everything else as well. So selecting the right CRO partner, maintaining adequate oversight in at 25%, and coordinating multiple vendors is down at the bottom. Maybe just not as many people with that many vendors. I don't know. Any surprises there, guys? Does that align with what you'd have expected from these results? What are you thinking when you see that?
So it absolutely resonates with my view from the sponsor perspective. I already talked about the scope of work and that being a difficult area for us. But yeah, I mean, selecting the right CRO partner and making sure you've got adequate oversight. I think the oversight piece cannot be understated, because especially if you are a smaller organization and you don't have a lot of internal resources to help maintain that oversight, you know, how do you really know that what you're being told is going on is actually going on? And we've been burned, you know, in that space before, even when we thought we've been asking the correct questions, etc. So that's a pretty sticky question, especially if you have not set up a good enough oversight structure with the correct checkpoints. At GSK years ago, we used to call them like level 1 checks or management monitoring checks, but just some way to set up right from the beginning so that what you think is happening is actually happening, some kind of metrics, etc., to be able to verify that things are getting done the way you anticipate.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to comment, Hans?
Well, I absolutely agree with what Anne-Marie is saying, and you know, I think the one advice that I would give when it comes to defining the scope is to really involve your CRO in that discussion. You know, it doesn't need to be a one-way street, and all too often I think it is a one-way street where sponsors unilaterally want to set the scope, but there's always the risk that you're overseeing things, or that you lack perhaps oversight in the way the CRO is organized, and therewith you miss points. So it should be a dialogue. And then, you know, I guess the other point about oversight that's also being managed, and I think it ties nicely in with one of the questions that's being answered. You know, as a small organization, you know, what shops do we need? There's a lot of responsibilities that CROs can take on from you. The one thing that they can't take on is indeed that CRO oversight. The regulators are quite strict about the oversight that you need to provide as the sponsor. And I think, you know, if I was working in a small CRO that is heavily depending on outsourcing, that's where I would put most of my focus, is indeed how do I outsource, how do I maintain oversight, and how do I cover my budget, oversee my budget, and secure that we're not running over budget or over timelines or out of quality.
Do you mind if I just jump in a second, James? Because something you said, Hans, triggered something. You mentioned, you know, going to the CRO for expertise, and that is something that I always scratch my head a little bit over, because that is the reason that companies go to a CRO, a big company or a small company, for resources and theoretical expertise. And so it's always a bit of a head scratcher when we say we're going to CROs for their expertise, and then the sponsors are convinced that they still know what's best. I mean, in particular, you can see that during, finalizing scopes of work. Not that I'm thinking about that continuously, but, when you're trying to do a scope of work and the CRO is telling you, no, I think you need X, Y, and Z. And as a sponsor, say, no, we don't need that. And you leave those negotiations having saved, millions of dollars in ways in which no one can verify. And then you end up spending it again at the end because you dramatically underscoped, or you end up having to change some assumptions that if you had listened in the first place, you may not have, it may have felt a little bit uncomfortable, but you would have had it right at the beginning.
Absolutely. And so that question, just so everyone knows, which Hans touched on there, came in from the audience. So it was posing the situation, a small organization, they heavily outsource. And in this case, as a sponsor, what should their SOP system look like? Should we only maintain SOPs that cover sponsor CRO interface? So that was the question, everybody. I don't know if anyone has got anything else to add to that question, which Hans touched on. Shaking heads. Looks like we might have covered it there, Hans, which is great. I'm going to as well ask the other audience question. So it kind of aligns nicely with where the conversation's going as well. And if we're looking at what's kind of, I guess, preventing the status quo from changing, and this next question is, so if this personalized approach of smaller CROs is the preferred option and has these benefits, why do companies tend to purchase from large, big name CROs so often? Why do we settle with this status quo? I can see, Philip, you're nodding your head. Do you want to jump in first?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think that's a sort of mantra, because it's the big CRO, they probably are the best. So you have to go there. It's almost impossible for a smaller CRO based just on quality alone, and not having the particular name or the size of a CRO just to come into this market, because it's dominated by a few of the big ones, and they are there because they are big, and so they are most likely, and it's also risk aversive. So from my perspective, the pharmaceutical industry has always been very risk aversive, so they choose for a big company, for a big CRO, because that's probably the best, because if they weren't the best, they wouldn't have been so big. So that's a bit of their attitude. And I try always as a PI to manage that risk aversiveness, both in the design of the study, but also in the choosing of the CRO.
Awesome. Does anyone want to add to that? Hans, I can see you've unmuted.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's different aspects that play into it. One is absolutely the risk aversiveness, and sometimes it's the pharma companies themselves. What we find is that also with some of these smaller biotech companies, it might be the investors that are actually pushing for the large heroes, because developing a compound for a certain indication, it's like a high-level casino. It's a risky business anyway, so they try to reduce the rest of the risks by saying, okay, we go for one of the established name, I'm sure it's going to be fine. I think another part of it is that people feel that the smaller CROs don't have the geographical footprint because typically they will need to partner. And with that partner model, there is then the fear that there is not that true ownership of the full delivery, or that there is inconsistency in delivery. And I think what needs to be realized is that there's a lot of organizations like ours where actually, the partnerships are well established. There's one lead CRO that will take full responsibility from end-to-end delivery from any part of the world that's been involved. And we've been delivering trials from over 35 countries. And that we actually work in one QMS, one CTMS, so there is a consistent quality delivered from A to Z. It's no different from working from a small, with a large CRO, except that indeed you do get that much higher level of attention and expertise, I would say.
Anne-Marie, perhaps a bit of the industry perspective on this side. Why are we stuck where we are?
So I think just about everything has already been discussed, but I think that the last option that we had on that on the poll where we talked about coordinating the efforts of multiple vendors, I think that can also be a factor in choosing a larger supplier, especially now as they're getting even larger, buying up the capability, multiple kinds of capabilities. The idea can be that, well, if I've got that all under one large umbrella, that means potentially less oversight from a smaller sponsor, because everything theoretically is working in the same, in the same, I'll call it the same basket. So I think that is just another piece. I know, at least personally, that's gone into some of the decision making, and that can also have impact, or we might think that could also have an impact on the site's experience also, because if the sponsor is using 8 different CROs with 8 different systems to do all of their things, that would impact on the site. So is there some benefit to going with a large, a large basket, and potentially less points of interface?
Yeah, I would like to follow on. I mean, the large CROs have every service you can imagine under that same roof. Our approach, whether it's recruitment or risk-based quality management, is to go out to the market and find the best provider of that service, and then integrate them seamlessly into the operations of the study. To us, that's a really good approach, because some recruitment agencies, for example, are better at this specific indication than others. So we talk to 3 or 4, find the best person to provide that service, the best company, and that's what we put into our proposal.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Tsvetelina, please
yeah,
go.
Just the last let's say addition from my side. It's also the inspection or historical let's say audit history. The big companies, they of course having a bigger volume of work, they're more vulnerable, or let's say more frequently object of the audit and inspection, which is of course something quite important. How experienced your partner within the regulatory environment, how they deal with the inspection from biggest agency like FDA, Health Canada, EMA, are they familiar, do they have the right expertise? But the experience, it's not only numbers, of course. Smaller organization, just because of the smaller volume of work, maybe not object of inspection in the last a year or 2 years, but this is rather a matter of probability, not to the real indicator whether they can manage or not manage regulatory inspection in any of their services they provided to.
And we've touched on it briefly, kind of the impacts of the last year or so, and the move to kind of more decentralized remote system. What has been the impact of this on outsourcing? Has it leveled the playing field at all? I've seen around the term kind of democratization of certain spaces due to the digitization of things. We've talked about this in our marketing events. Specifically, what does this look like from an outsourcing perspective? Do you agree? Do you disagree with that idea?
It's a tricky question, I'd say, but I think in general terms, I think it does. To some extent, you could argue with the technology developing so rapidly, it's hard for the smaller organizations perhaps to keep up compared to the larger CROs that can invest more resources to it. The flip side of that is, because it's developing so rapidly, there's always third parties that are developing something that is newer, flashier, more user-friendly than anything that the large CROs may have in-house, and that therefore actually, working with effective partnerships can ensure that you always, stay on the tip of the developments and use the latest developments. So in that sense, I would agree with you, James, that it does seem to democratize also the playing field from an outsourcing perspective.
Cool. Well handled, Hans. Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I would just agree and add to that. I mean, I think what's happened over the last year and a half is sort of, we've kind of shaken everything up and like let it fly. So I think that there's lots and lots of opportunity in all kinds of places, because it doesn't, the playing field is completely changed. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how, who comes out on the playing field on top and how they do it. Because I mean, at this point, at least in my opinion, there's nobody out there that's completely cracked the nut. There's probably very few people that are really ready to, just kind of move into the new world confidently. We're still kind of figuring it out.
Absolutely. And so this new playing field, obviously people's perceptions and what they believe to be risk factors and everything around certain systems is going to help define what this new playing field is, which leads us very nicely into our next poll. So audience, it'd be great to actually get these results quickly. So what do you see as the biggest risk factors in working with a small CRO? You can only answer one. So it's either financial stability of the company, the limited experience potentially, limited geographical footprint, or lack of access to experts. So I'm gonna push you guys. Please answer this now. And it would be great to get the results and share them with the panelists now to get their comment. Hans, I know you've already touched on it, so interested to see how these results come out. I'm going to hold on for another 10 seconds or so. So if you're there, please do answer if it's applicable to yourself. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End polling. Share results. There we go. So much clearer winners and losers here than the last poll. Financial stability doesn't look like people are too fussed, but very much care about limited geographical footprint and limited experience. And then lack of access to experts also comes up with a fair few respondents. What do you guys think? Limited geographical footprint being the main one. Is that surprising? You're nodding your head, Tsvetelina. I'm going to go to you first. You've just volunteered.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not surprising. That's maybe the biggest differentiator, the volume, the size. What of course we can, and already Hans presented and touched the base in the previous discussion on the panelists, it's that working through a partnership which are really in the region, so being there, living with the culture, either the LATAM or Asia Pac or US, it's and working within the one QMS for a long-term period. I mean, this partnership are not for a year and then stop it and then a new partnership. It's actually, which is the solution that it's actually address this limited geographical footprint, because we as a company, or it doesn't matter, it's working on the Eastern Europe one, and at least from my experience, the people, the way how the clinical trials, the regulation, the mindset, you need to really be here as a real presence to not only a few people in the country to understand how the attitude to the trials, which are the key, really the key opinion leaders, what is the regulatory environment, and actually to be a local expert, a part of the global partnership. This is for me at least the key factor and yeah, as I mentioned, it's not a surprising that this is maybe the biggest percentage of the concerns.
Anyone else want to comment on this poll? Hans, please go.
Absolutely, yeah. It reminds me that when I came into Julius Clinical, to my current organization, coming from the largest CRO for 20 years, having advocated that, having fully owned subsidiaries around the world was the best thing since sliced bread. And then coming in, there's so many things that I found that really positively surprised me, and I've heard it from many of my experienced colleagues since. A couple of things that really stand out is, first of all, the geographical footprint is there. We've delivered global trials over 35 countries, Asia Pacific, Australia, Latin America, across Europe. And actually what I saw is regulatory startup timelines are faster. The local cultural knowledge, Tsvetelina touched on it, is much more deeper than you would see from the local organizations. But also because we are working in a partnership, working with small organizations, those are typically led by entrepreneurs that are really looking for solutions, really take their customers to heart, and really are being creative and ensuring delivery. And we truly see that, and it actually helps the trials being executed better. And the last, and then I'll shut up, thing that really surprised me is that the people that are choosing to work for smaller CROs tend to be much more committed. So they actually stay on the trial for a much longer period of time. And there's a trial that we actually did with Professor Scheltens that I still vividly recollect, phase 2 Alzheimer trial running over 2.5 years that we literally finished with exactly the same project team, CRAs, project managers, CTO, than that we started it with. And I think that's unheard of in any of the largest CROs.
Can I just chip in, because I agree with both Hans and also Tsvetelina, because I think you touched upon the importance of the local team in the local country with the local requirements and the local culture, which I think is very important, and also the dedication of each of these smaller teams in every country, and together they make the geographical footprint complete. I think that's really, really vital. I think, and basically what people neglect or don't understand is, even if you have a very large CRO and you think they have a geographical footprint all over the world because they are a very large CRO, in fact, the teams of this very large CRO in every country are very different, and not all up to the standard of the largest CRO. So I've seen a lot of differences in a specific CRO working in Europe or in the US being very completely different. So it is in fact only in name it's a geographical footprint that is complete, but in fact it's not. And with working with the several sort of different CROs in different countries working together on a specific project, in fact, I think because of the motivation, because of the engagement, is actually poised to success much more.
And Anne-Marie, just before I ask for your comment, I'm just going to as well bring in a comment from the audience, from David. Talked about the potential lack of scalability for smaller CROs also being a concern, in addition to what we've got there on the poll. Maybe that should have been something on there. We've kind of touched on it with the geographical side of things. Does that make you think of anything as well? And just from an industry perspective, what's your thoughts on these risk factors or myths, shall we say?
So I think I saw that comment come in also. I think it's a good comment. I think we probably missed that as a potential choice for answering. So for sure, it's something of concern also, especially if they are smaller and you see as a sponsor, you see your trial as larger than life, being concerned that somebody who's small will be able to scale themselves up appropriately can absolutely be a concern. I think the limited geographical footprint, I know I hear that, but we've actually got some trials going on with larger CROs where we're picking other smaller CROs to go into some of the other countries. So that's not, we say that, but even the large companies that are choosing large CROs for geographical footprint are still doing things different in some cases. So there's nothing here, I guess, that really surprises me that hasn't already been commented upon.
Cool, awesome. Hans?
Yeah, I would actually flip that one around. We've delivered trials from over 1,000 sites, close to 10,000 subjects. I think, we can go where the trial needs to be, where the patients are, where the investigators are, that can deliver the quality of the data that you require. And we can actually scale up quite simply and or scale down if a trial comes to an halt. And we're not tied to having, you know, stranded resources in country X, and therefore we try to push a trial there, for example.
Awesome. So David, maybe reply. I think I'd be interested to see what you think of our panelists' opinions there. Now I'm going to move on to another audience question. They state that often large CROs rely on past company experience to sell opportunities, but do not have the team with current relevant experience or availability to put on the study when won. How do smaller CROs actually guarantee that this idea, this sell, is actually the team which then will actually do the work and be provided to you?
Yeah, I can speak for Peachtree. I mean, we hire project managers and CRAs with years of experience. We are not a training ground for clinical development. So within that group of project managers, site managers, CRAs, we have a very high level of experience in multiple therapeutic areas. You know, a great project manager, I believe, can manage a project regardless of the therapeutic indication, but that specific therapeutic area experience is a good thing. But we pride ourselves on really great site and project management.
Awesome, thank you, Keith. I'd welcome comments from Hans and Tsvetelina as well.
Yeah, at least I can speak for our organization. So we invest a lot of knowledge management, and we also, as mentioned and touched the base, on the management position, there are people with long retention period within the company and within the organization. So all the knowledge and the practical experience within the, not only the therapeutic areas, but if we speak to the conduct of phase 1 studies, it's also to the specific study design, to the practicalities that we have challenged throughout the year. So we tried firstly to keep this knowledge and to move to the new team members within the organization through the trainee and management involvement, and also collecting this information and being part of some really practical oriented trainings to the team, and to ensure that the junior people within the organization will at least having touched the base to the practical experience, to the case scenarios that we have observed in the past, and of course to have transferring the knowledge between the older and the senior and the new team members.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the old switch and bait technique, as it's an often used term within the CRO industry, and you know, it's really something that I would always try to avoid at all costs, but sometimes is inevitable. In particular, if you know the time period between an RFP versus an award stretches out, because I can't leave my people sitting on the bench for too long a period of time. It's just not a sustainable business model. Having said that, you know, if timelines are being adhered to, I would always work hard to actually get the project manager, the key team members on the project that actually, you know, presented to you at a bid defense or presented to you in a proposal. And we actually quite often have people written into a contract or written certain bonus penalties around key staff members being available for, you know, at least a minimal duration or something. So there's definitely various ways that you can minimize that risk. I mean, you can't, of course, completely avoid it, because if people leave a company, they have that right to leave their organization. But there's definitely steps that you can take to mitigate those risks.
Absolutely. We've done a fair amount of comparing and contrasting here with larger CROs. So I'm going to actually let the audience do their share of this as well. So next poll and final poll, so do respond. What do you see as the biggest risk factor in working with large CROs yourselves? Is it experts not being accessible during the execution and the trial itself? Staff turnover, as Hans we've just commented on. Lack of attention, rigid infrastructure, so not flexible, or high cost. Gonna get these answers in live as well, so our respondents can respond, sorry. And let's hold on another 10 seconds, try and get 50% of the audience voted. Keep your answers coming in. I can see you doing it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There you go, last one in, I saw that. So this is the results. Experts and not being accessible and high cost, very much the last and most least answered options. Rigid infrastructure limiting flexibility, very much the highest. High staff turnover as well, and lack of attention to smaller sponsors and projects. Guys, I can see nodding heads. What do we think?
I would just say I recognize all of those. I think we mentioned the high staff turnover. Indeed, lack of true attention to smaller sponsors and projects. If you just have a smaller trial, a phase 2A, for instance, in it, just 200 or 300 patients, it's usually sort of they put on the smallest team they can find somewhere with the most inexperienced people on it, because it's only a small project. So I think that has been my experience, and so it's I think it's all true. The cost I can't judge, but I think I recognize all of those. Yeah.
Anne-Marie, what about yourself? Do you agree as well? Do you recognize them all? Weight any differently?
I mean, I clearly recognize them all, for sure. The rigid infrastructure, I think right now for me, is something that's very much top of mind. It shows up in what I was talking about in the beginning, and the need for, change orders for this, that, and the other thing, a lack of ability to be able to turn on a dime when the situation changes for any one of a number of reasons. So that probably for me right at this second is I'm feeling most acutely, but certainly the lack of attention to smaller sponsors and projects, we absolutely see that. We have absolutely not gotten the A team on more than one occasion, although occasionally we do, and when you do, then you get fantastic and you get fantastic service. But yeah, there's nothing here I think that surprises, and like I said, right now where my heart is living the pain is the rigid infrastructure and the lack of flexibility and doing things differently.
Okay. Well, we've got about 10 minutes at our hands. Do you want to?
Yeah, no, it's classic dilemma management. The more rigid you make your infrastructure, the more efficient it becomes, and that's where a lot of large CROs are driving towards. And then they also recognize the limitations, so they often present themselves as being smaller by creating like a emerging biotech unit or dedicated units. Trying to mimic a smaller organization and creating the flexibility. But what should be realized is that often, that's a thin layer of perhaps the project management team that is dedicated to these type of sponsors. But the large execution machine underneath it remains the same. And it is what makes them successful on the one hand, because they're very good in, driving that commodity trial. But it's also the part that makes it hard to work with them if you don't have a commodity trial.
I can see nodding heads there. I'm going to shift up the topic a little bit. We've got about 10 minutes now for audience Q&A and then any remaining questions. So please fire in anything that you're thinking, audience. We'd love to get those comments. David asks an interesting question here, and he talks about a recent study he saw where 80% of trials do not reach their initial recruitment targets. What can we do to counter this trend? And I guess opening up the question a bit, what's the kind of comparison here from small and larger CROs and how they approach recruitment in this area? You've stumped them, David.
No, I don't think it's a bit difficult because it sounds like too much drumming of our own chest, but we had the interesting aspect of being called in to rescue a large trial. This was literally, 20,000 plus trial, where we were invited to come in and rescue the trial. And it's interesting that due to, all of the reasons that Philip actually referred to earlier, the better relationship that we have with the sites, we actually were able to recruit double the number of patients per site per month compared to the large CRO that was originally contracted to conduct the trial. And, in 25 countries that we were running, in 18 of those 25 countries, we were outpacing the other CRO. In 4, I think we were about the same, and in the 3 others, we were lacking a little bit behind. And this was whilst the other CRO had started 18 months earlier, so they had the first pick of the sites, and we were tracking it in their system. So everything was equal. It was almost like a randomized trial. So it was a very interesting observation, and I think it all comes down to a more personalized attention, not just to the sponsor but also to the sites.
Yeah, at Peachtree, you get the whole company working on your study. So it is a different level of site engagement frequently. And Hans is right. We've often talked to sponsors about rescuing their study for a lot of different reasons. Poor communication, the CRO doesn't bring issues to the table in a timely manner. Recruitment is slow. So we get the opportunity to really look at each of these critically and think, outside that proverbial box to find the solutions to make it work.
Absolutely. And so a couple more questions coming in. I'm going to ask 2 at once. One person, Frank, interested to hear thoughts on how connected devices impact this discussion. So around adherence and dropout rates in RCTs. What are they going to do for this space? A bit left field, perhaps, some of this. And opening that up more widely, another question came in to do with DCTs and concern around whether the advent of TCTs is going to make it much harder to manage and maintain the quality of studies. Is that a fair comment? What do you guys think? And don't forget the devices as well.
So I'll take a shot because I think they're both actually really big questions. And there was another question in there around what are the biggest gaps, in being able to crack the nut of the new world. So I'll sort of take it in steps and hopefully answer. So I think there are, real endemic issues in the clinical trial infrastructure that we just haven't been able to overcome. The industry is risk averse, and it's actually risk averse to risk management. So the idea of being able to have access to huge amounts of data, potentially through wearables and other collection sources, and also being able to use data effectively from a decentralized clinical trial, that being able to use that requires us to have, in my opinion, pretty good risk management strategies. And if you've got those pretty good risk management strategies, the power of the data is amazing. I've said this before at other places I've talked about, but you look at the banking and financial industry, they know immediately that the liquor purchase in Brooklyn was not me, but they know that the trip up to Buffalo, New York with my daughter to go to college was me. I didn't indicate anything differently, but they have, they've got the information there and have learned how to look at it quickly, efficiently, effectively to recognize, I'll call it a wonky pattern that's going to raise an alert. There doesn't seem to me to be any reason why the industry can't be striving for that same amount of capability to look at the data, especially as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger using these new collection techniques. But if the industry is not willing to think about it that way, then yeah, then we won't think about it that way and it'll be a problem. You know, that also ties into the infrastructure problem that we've already talked about. It's been built, it's very rigid, and currently it's built to work efficiently when everything works the same, which is not where we are. And then, you know, the change management, getting a fairly risk-averse industry to think differently about how it operates is no small feat. So that's my stab at those questions.
And I can see you're muted. Can you keep your response quick, just as we've got more questions coming in and we've only got 4 minutes?
Yeah, so real quick. So come back in a couple of years' time, because we're actually conducting a EU-sponsored trial specifically looking at some of those items. But to Anne-Marie's point, I think, you know, one of the things with decentralized clinical trials and connected devices is you get more data points, and therefore you get quicker signals if something is off, like non-compliance. So it does facilitate those kind of answers.
Absolutely. And so the other questions I mentioned, we've got a question about what percentage roughly our trials rescued. So rescued from original contracted large CROs and need help. Any comment on that? And another question, what advice would you give to a sponsor for selecting the best fit CRO? Things like individual experience, team performance, quality systems have been suggested.
Yeah, I don't know what the percentage is quickly, but you know, it's something we encounter frequently for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, I mean, it really comes down to assessing the situation, providing feedback, asking a lot of questions about the current study and what the problems are, and figuring out what solutions there are to mitigate those problems.
I'll just add about selecting the percentage of our company. I cannot also comment the exact percentage or roughly even, but still there is a quite, let's say, significant portion of being a rescue. But the selecting a right partner, for me, it's if I can summarize in this way, going into fit for purpose process of selection rather to go to the tick box exercise. Because if you're doing something like this just to ticking the boxes, it's not working, neither in the selection of the partner or in any other activities in clinical research.
Absolutely. So we've got 1 minute left, guys. We're going to have to wrap it up. I'd love a closing comment from everyone. And Philip, we haven't heard you in a while, so I'm going to point to you first. What is a key takeaway for the audience?
Oh, well, I think the smaller the better in this case, which is unusual. And in the selection case, I would say involve the PI of the study as well. I think there's a lot of sort of PIs that just hang around and give their name to it, but I think you should engage him or her much more also in the selection process of CROs.
Hans?
Yeah, I would say, do you trust the people that you're talking to? Because certainly if you're talking to smaller CROs, you will be talking to the people that will be heavily involved in your trial, which will not be the case with some of the larger ones.
Cool. So we've got smaller is better, trust. Tsvetelina, Keith, Anne-Marie, any last comment?
Quality is not related to the size of the company. So this is my last comment on this.
Well, you know, if you're a sponsor and you have a project coming up, hopefully we have broadened your view on smaller CROs and provided some of the rationale why we'd like to talk to you.
Ask the company what they think will go wrong and how they would fix it.
Great advice for many things, I'm sure. Okay. We've run out of time. I can see the attendees are starting to drop off. We've got a lot of busy people, I'm sure the panelists as well. So thanks so much, panelists. Thanks everyone who listened in. Hopefully this was useful, and I'm sure we'll see you all again another time. Over and out.